moment. I'm delighted to say Keith Wood joins us to look at the front row. Keith, how are you?
Good morning, Ger. I'm excellent, thank you. Really good. How are you?
Good. The front row is a situation where we've had a lot of strength in recent years, and then all of a sudden players reach that back end of their careers and we begin to get worried. So how strong a front row do we actually have at the moment, do you think?
I think we have a decent front row. We have a little bit of a gap in a couple of spots, and our depth chart, I think, is relying on players coming back from injury, actually, to put us into a strong position. So I think we're okay, but it's funny, at different times, you said it a few years ago, we seem to be incredibly strong and have plenty there, and always with a doubt at Tighthead, who was coming up behind Tadhg Furlong. That has changed somewhat, but maybe not for another year when we see some of the guys that we have in our chart coming through. But it's one of those interesting points where if you get one or two injuries, you can seem very shallow in what you have in terms of quality, because we have only 4 teams in Ireland, and we are trying to make certain that we have enough of players playing all the time. But to get good at anything, you need to play. But to get good in the front row, you really need to learn during match time, and because it can be make or break of an awful lot of games, you tend to stick with the same guys all the time. You tend not to rotate them quite as much.
I think Andrew Porter is the perfect example of that, where he definitely struggled in a couple of big games, and then because he has had to play every moment, you've seen him get much better. You've seen him, like, I presume in the front row you suffer badly until you learn how to cope, and then you just, because you've learned how to cope, you're over a hump.
I think I may have said this before, but I played, when I was 18 or 19, I played Junior Cup for Garryowen, and we played against Thomond Rugby Club, and there was a guy, Duggan, I think, was the tight head, and I was at hooker, and he absolutely killed me. We played 3 times that year. He absolutely killed me in the first match. He killed me in the second match, and in the third match, I managed to be fine. I'd learned how to deal with him, and he was a very crafty. He was, like, I was 18, he was 33 or 4 maybe, and he knew exactly what to do and how to put me under pressure. But I figured it out before the end of the year, and it just takes a period of time to do that. Porter, when Porter came on, he got screwed in a few games actually, and he got screwed in a lot of scrums over the first 10, 15, 20 games he played. That's fine, it isn't just him. It has to be the rest of the pack have to look after that guy, because he's then proved how resilient he can be, how good he can be, and he's at the top of the chart at the moment. Now, the reason for me he's top of the chart is because Tadhg Furlong has been injured and laid off for quite a while, so I don't quite know where he is, but I would have him always there, because as soon as he gets back, he's going to get very close to that jersey, because he is a class act.
That's the thing, isn't it, that we've seen enough now. And so just to labour the point one last moment on Furlong, he's still only 24. I did Google his age there.
On Porter.
On Porter. Sorry, on Porter. He's still only 24. Like, the amount of rugby that he's now played, we're going to have a massive benefit for. It means that when Furlong does come back, you've no doubts about taking Furlong half here and a half there, and they can both be explosive for those halves.
Look, the way the game has moved, you're looking to get 50 minutes from your first tight head and 30 minutes for your second one. And personally, I'd like that to change. I'd rather a guy stayed on for longer, and that if there was a reduction of the subs, that would happen. But no, I don't have any fear for him whatsoever. And it's, again, he's now got used to the game. He's got used to how difficult it is. What he needs to be able to do is not give away as many penalties. He still gives away a few penalties at different times, not just at scrum time, but at play around the field, because like Tighthead is the toughest place to play. All the pressure of the scrum still goes through the Tighthead. It is unbelievably fatiguing. So as he gets older, at 24, he's going to get better and better. And what we want to do, I've said this for a lot of different players, we want him playing for another 7 or 8 years, so we want to get the most out of him, for him and for us. So if we can tidy up some of the discipline things, which are in my view, a bit of fatigue because you get your head up from a scrum and you're rushing to the next thing, and you may be walking because it looks, you're rushing, but you're only able to walk because you're almost shortened by every scrum. So you can be very fatigued. So that's a part he needs to tidy up.
Okay, well let's look at we've got some graphics for these. So the Loosehead, we've got Cian Healy is in first position, Dave Kilcoyne second, Ed Byrne is third, and your next gen is Eric O'Sullivan. So was this close?
For me, Cian Healy still is. I mean, I think he's almost on the point of keeling over, actually, but he has been like that for years, and his performance is still incredibly good. Dave Kilcoyne again has been injured, but I find he gives us something different. He's a powerful carrier. He's got a great bit of gas. He got a good bit fitter, I think, in the last year. Ed Byrne, and I've James Cronin in as well. That's my addendum this morning. That he has started playing an awful lot better as well. I'm not worried at Loosehead. I think we seem to be doing okay. Look, I just think, for me, I'd like Cian Healy and Dave Kilcoyne, and you could start either depending on who you were playing against, because it depends on what exactly you're looking for. But Cian Healy is a warrior, of the highest order. What he has actually been able to, from the injury he's come back from, to still be able to play the way he is. Though at times I worry for him. He looks so shattered when he's on the field because, like some of the matches we've seen over the last period of time, it's an attritional place to play. Like, front row is bloody tough.
Yeah, okay, so you're relatively confident that strength and depth is going to be fine to get us over the course of the tournament, assuming again it goes ahead. Let's move on. Let's move on to hooker, because this is where things get interesting. I think we've got Rob Herring is the man in possession. Ronan Keller is second. Dave Heffernan is third, and next gen is Dan Sheehan. Yeah.
Look, there's other guys there. There's Kevin O'Byrne in Munster, Scannell in Munster, though I just don't think he's played particularly well. He's not as effective around the field. We're just not seeing a huge amount of him. Rob Herring, for me, is the standout. I think we're struggling a bit since Rory Best. And as we had said at the time, Rory Best stayed on too long. And partly for that happening, it takes away some of the opportunity for other players that come afterwards. And I think Ronan Kelleher, for me, still is the right guy. I think he's a couple of flaws in his throw, and he needs to sort those out pretty quickly. Dave Heffernan's had a few chances, and at times he's been good. At times he hasn't been as industrious as you'd want from your hooker and as accurate as you want. Dan Sheehan, we've seen very, very little of, and but he's a big beast of a young fella with his socks around his ankles. He's kind of almost Muck Savage hooker, and he's not that, but he's a very good ball carrier. So it's trying to see what we have for this period of time. I would be looking at him tightening up his skills and becoming part of an Irish team in the next year to 18 months. But for me, I'd like to see it as close as you possibly can, because we're not, for a long period of time, we've had like really good hookers going back to Jerry Flannery and Rory Best and Sean Cronin, all doing different things for the Irish team. Like Rob Herring is there, but I think that's a position that's up for grabs.
You mentioned Ronan Kelleher's throw there, Keith. How does he improve that? Is it practice? Can he tap into maybe some of Paul O'Connell's expertise, like in terms of where he should be throwing, in terms of the line out? How much of that comes from the coaching? How much of that comes from yourself?
Yeah, I think an awful lot comes from yourself, but if you can get someone to do a harsh, critical analysis of his throw, he drifts off his throw to the right at times. Some of it can come down to stance. I know that the convention now is to move to a square stance to throw. I think that's very good for a thrower, but it's not very good for a scrummager, because you're trying to throw using some of the flexibility in your lower back that often diminishes as the game goes on from scrummaging. It's then having the certainty of throwing where you know they're going to be. So I think our line out in Ireland has struggled since Devon Toller left. partly because he's a giant and it's an awful lot easier to throw the ball to a huge guy in the middle of the line out. But some of the throws are very, very flat from Kelleher, and he doesn't have to be that flat. So he has to build an arch into his throw so that it'll land on the player rather than cut through the air, because if any of that timing is off, you can often see balls fly over the back of the line out. So, but that's understandable because he's young, he's still young. So, and people would say, well, surely it must be easy to be able to learn how to throw. You just stand and throw at a point of the wall. Throwing at a point of the wall is perfect for throwing at a point in the wall. But there's a huge amount of nuance and line out. Sometimes you're gauging it to where the player is and the players around him. So you might put extra arc on the ball to get over a guy. You'll only learn that from playing and training and playing with the top players all the time. But when you're saying practice, provided your throw is pure, you practice. If you have a flaw in your throw and you're practicing the flaw, and that flaw comes out under pressure. So you want to make certain that whatever kinks are in the throw have been solved out, and you learn a whole variety of different throws. I mean, I had the great pleasure of starting with Brent Anderson, a New Zealand player. He played 4 times for New Zealand. He played with Gary Owen. He treated me really badly because I didn't hit him with the ball often enough, and he forced me into practicing so many different types of throws. But even as a 2-jumper, he had variations on how he wanted to jump and where he wanted to jump and the pace of the ball. And it ended up, you had to force your way into thinking that I don't need 1 throw, I need 10 throws. And there's a joy in learning all the different nuances. Of course, a joy I often got wrong, but it's still one that you want to try and get right.
We have goalkeeping coaches, and we have very specialised coaches in every single sport. Do we have throwing coaches? I mean, I know there's a forwards coach, and I know there's a scrum coach, but presumably the scrum coach isn't looking after the line-out thrower as well, is he?
No. And in fact, Jerry Flannery was brought over as a line-out throwing coach, I think originally for Quins. I think his remit has spread a bit more. And there was a guy with an incredibly pure throw. So he had a couple of flaws, but actually his throw and the dynamic of his throw was incredibly fluid. So I still think he's the best line-out thrower I'd seen. Especially before he injured his shoulder. He struggled a little bit after a shoulder injury, but that's one of the issues. It's a big skill, and they're it was so frustrating when you're having. Sometimes you just go into the total shockers with your lineouts, and you're standing inside in the gym, and you'll see the guys, and they'll all throw the ball, and they'll hit the spot on the wall. If it was only that simple, and you'd have the kind of competitions at the end of training, and sure you'd lose, and that's your bread and butter. So, I think it needs to be looked at a little bit more. I often think when things change that they change because they suit somebody, but they don't necessarily change for the better. So I'm still not entirely certain of the straight-on throw. I think it leaves you very little ability for adjustment if something happens in your eye line, and it's very hard to adjust if you're halfway through a throw. So, I think there is a need for a technical skills coach, but I think any skills coach should be able to do it. They have to just practice on it themselves. But I think there's ways of looking at it, how your hand finishes. I mean, where your hand cocks behind your head when you throw the throw, where your hands finish and the line in which they finish. And it sounds it's hard to explain that on radio, but even for this. But if your hands finish there, which if you can see that down the screen, they go straight. If your hand finishes there, the ball drifts off to the right.
Yeah. Well, you think, I mean, it's a repeatable skill. Grand, the pressure is going to increase if it's a defensive 5-metre line or an offensive 5-metre line with the game on the line. Fair enough, the pressure will ramp up, and the psychology is important to it too. But it's a single repeatable skill that, or maybe it's a multiple repeatable skill that you learn.
It is a multiple. It's definitely a multiple, but also you'll often hear commentators say, "Can't believe you threw the ball to the back. That's the hardest throw." It often isn't the hardest throw. It's the one to the front is often the hardest throw
because it's being defended better. Is that it?
Correct, because it's been defended, because if there's a delay in a guy getting off the ground, it can put it under huge pressure. You can throw the ball. If you throw the ball to 17 metres, it means the lineout's over, for one, because it's gone over 15 metres, but there's nobody behind it to catch it. So if you can throw that ball comfortably, that's an easy throw. You know, it just depends on the person. You know, if you're trying to thread a needle in the middle of the lineout and you have two sets of jumpers, or in some teams you will have two pods of jumpers and a very tall second row who jumps on his own, which effectively means it's like three jumpers. Or in the days of John Hayes, he would lift Malcolm O'Kelly on his own, so you could have three pods lifting against the opposition. That becomes incredibly difficult. So it depends where you are in the field. Again, I heard something the other day, why would you throw the ball over the back of the lineout? Well, if you're 5 yards from your own line, your guys who are running onto that ball only have 5 yards to go, the opposition have 10 yards to go. That's an easy throw.
Yeah, and look, that's the type of stuff that I think a lot of time gets lost in the immediate second where the incident happens. Let's do Tighthead before we wrap this up. So we've already talked about this. Andrew Porter is ahead of Tadhg Furlong. John Ryan is third, and the next generation, Kenyon Knox of Munster and Roman Salanoa of Munster as well. Yeah,
I haven't seen enough of the two guys, the two other guys, and that is an issue. I think they need to get a bit more game time, but for me, Porter, Furlong and John Ryan, I'm comfortable with all of those playing a Six Nations game. I think they can all do a very good job, especially because we're looking at playing a half. That's each player playing the bones of a half. Kenyon Knox, we've seen a little bit from Roman Salanoa, came off the bench 2 weeks ago. I thought it pretty impressive, actually. So the first chance you really get to see him, he is a big bear of a man. He gets himself into a very good position, and the scrum doesn't move an inch. That's great, you know, because those first days are very frightening when you're in there, because you don't quite know whether you're going to be up to scratch. You might be up to training, but white hot games make things very, very different. So, but they're the ones, not for this competition, but for in the future to look.
Okay, there's loads of suggestions coming through on our Instagram comments box as well. Dan Sheehan's brother Bobby is a unit, 6'5", 110 kilos, 20 years old. Conan O'Donnell, get him back from Crusaders in New Zealand, and a lot of love for Porter at the moment. But a lot of people wondering about Furlong too. I mean, you know, I guess what have you done for me lately? But Tadhg Furlong is Lions quality and world class. So Irish rugby needs Tadhg Furlong back to the absolute peak level that he can get to. And again, he's only 28 too, so there's no reason why he wouldn't get back there.
I think in my own view, I thought he got too heavy in the last year, and I'd like to see him more mobile. I know he needs to be big and solid, but he has world-class capabilities, and I'm sorry, what has he done for us lately? He's done nothing. He's been injured. Injury is part of rugby. You want that guy back on the field whenever you get the chance.
One last thing I just wanted to bring up, the eSportif Intelligence, they do an annual survey on, come out just on New Year's Eve. The highest paid players in France and England were the 10s. In the Celtic League, in the Pro 14, it was the second rows, and it's Tightheads are the only ones in the front row who appear at the top of the order, whereas the hookers are the worst paid in the Pro 14 and the top 14, and second worst paid in the Premiership.
Well, I was always trying to tell people I was underpaid, you know, but yeah, it's changed. Hookers used to be much further up. Tightheads were always at the top of the tree. It's that difficult to position. And what's become increasingly more important as the game has become more professional is not just your tighthead, but your tighthead lock. The ability to have a big bruiser to make certain that your scrum is solid. So, you know, if your scrum starts dissolving and you have a good kicker opposite you who's well paid, he's going to bang over every kick. So a powerful scrum means a huge amount. A goal kicker means a huge amount.
Keith, good stuff. Thanks a million.
Pleasure. Cheers, lads.
Keith Wood giving us his depth chart ahead of the Six Nations, we hope will go ahead.